Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Cherry Picking. And it is episode 34. We're the other side of the international break, and I have got my main man, Manny, next to me. How you doing, Manny?
All good, Mr. Beasley. Wonderful to be back for a little cherry picking. I've missed doing this, and I missed the last one, which was quite special. But this time around, I'm right here by your side. Let's get some picking done.
Definitely, definitely. And let's start off with the international break because I think it'd be rude not to mention it. Of course, England had two games. The first against the Ukraine, which was a one-all draw. Bit of a disappointing performance, but then there was the win against Scotland. And when you look at that bench, there's so much quality in this England side that really, we could and should be doing something at the next Euros and the subsequent World Cup. 2026 is the World Cup that I say I've got my heart set on as okay, everybody should be at their peak, and that's the one we should go for.
Agreed. Agreed. The only problem is when you select a squad the way Southgate did, picking players who either have not had game time this season or who are playing in a lower standard league, you're not really going to get that much in terms of hunger to try to do well and compete for your places.
Mhm.
The fact that Jordan Henderson, Calvin Phillips, and Harry Maguire were picked to play and start against the Ukraine pretty much outlined the lack of imagination that Southgate has. When you're in a position where you know that a win against the Ukraine will pretty much go a long way to securing your status as group leaders and potentially group winners. You know, you've got to go all out to beat them, and the Ukraine haven't exactly been in the best of sorts this particular campaign. And of course, when they tried to qualify for the World Cup, they actually ended up being knocked out of contention at the final stage by a Welsh team that had Kiefer Moore and Chris Mepham
Mhm.
um, playing pretty big roles in that team. So this should have been the opportunity for Southgate to try to reward some form players with starts against the Ukraine in a big game. But to stick with Harry Maguire, Jordan Henderson, have them starting, and see them, not really be able to quite do the business. I think it pretty much summed up his lack of imagination. Because there are several other players. I mean, you take a look at someone like Fikayo Tomori, who's been,
Yeah.
doing the business in Italy. The fact that he hasn't really been considered by Southgate is almost, I suppose I could say, sacrilegious in a way,
Yeah.
because I do take the point really that players like Harry Maguire and others haven't really let England down. Of course, John Stones being injured hasn't really helped the cause, and I think Stones and Maguire have always worked really well together. And then when you have a situation where we don't seem to have really established left back, Ben Chilwell might be an option, but the fact that he was, I mean, he played against the Ukraine, didn't do too badly, but
Hmm.
Luke Shaw will still be expected to be the first choice left back, and he's currently out injured for quite some time. And I really despise the fact that we ended up playing Kieran Trippier as a left back because the guy is right footed. And I'm
Yeah.
always a believer that the left back should be left footed. No ifs, no buts, no walnuts. And it's a question of really the lack of imagination that Southgate has, his lack of willingness to try to, make something happen, be a little bit more proactive, depending on the same players. Still starting Bukayo Saka, although he started to look a little bit, lethargic and all very, very tired in many cases. He did have a wonderful shot at goal, which was tipped onto the bar by the Ukrainian keeper, but apart from that, wasn't quite able to do very much. And when you have a situation where you keep playing him, starting him every week for Arsenal, and keep playing him for England, one of these days you are going to tire him out. And I was angered listening to Mikel Arteta saying Arsenal fans have to get used to seeing Bukayo Saka start every week because he has to continue to prove that he can play every week and have that desire to prove himself. To be among the best, be someone like a Lionel Messi or what have you. He's not the next Lionel Messi. He has to be his own player. And for a person like him, you've got to be smart in how you manage him, the way Pep Guardiola has been with Jackie Grealish, for instance. And Grealish, whenever he's played, after being rotated, he was able to do quite well. And last season, of course, he was a key player as City won the treble. So to say that Grealish doesn't compare to Saka is absolutely, outrageous in many ways. But the difference between a guy like Guardiola and a guy like Arteta is that Guardiola knows how to manage his players. Arteta doesn't. Southgate doesn't. So he brings on Phil Foden as a replacement for Saka, and he has a more than decent outing. He starts against Scotland, scores the opening goal, and you'd think that when you have an option at right wing, a replacement for Saka, you think now that, maybe not so much a replacement, but definitely some strong competition. You think that a manager would be able to, realize that he can, shuffle the squad around a bit and try and work with what he could have. But it's still the same lack of imagination that's plagued him. It's plagued the likes of Sven-Göran Eriksson, the likes of Fabio Capello, among others. Roy Hodgson also, completely floundered when it mattered. And I just think that if Southgate is to leave after Euro 2024, it will, if I never see him managing them again, it will be too soon, because we need a manager who will not be afraid to, freshen up the squad and also be willing to give certain players a kick up the backside they need and tell them, you've served us well, but it's time for you to walk away. And I think Jordan Henderson, the only reason why he might be getting starts these days is because Calvin Phillips isn't getting any minutes at City. Manchester City, that is. But with Henderson having gone to play in Saudi, I don't care how many world-class players go over there. That league will still not compare to the Premier League, and most of those foreigners are in the twilight of their careers anyway. So you think I shouldn't be complaining after, drawing against the Ukraine and beating Scotland convincingly. Of course, a high-flying Scotland team that are also doing really well in their Euro qualifying group, and also are going to be in the, Group A of the Nations League as well. But, they were somewhat flat, and we took advantage of them without really getting out of second gear. We've still got a lot to do, Craig, and that really worries me more than anything else.
To be honest, you made some really, really good points there, Manny, as well. And, with regards to comparing Roy Hodgson, Sven-Göran Eriksson, Fabio Capello, all these managers throughout the time, they had some great players on their hands. Steven Gerrard, Frank Lampard, John Terry, Beckham, you name them. There's so many throughout the years that were quality from the front to the back. You look at the likes of David Seaman, and then going forwards, you've got Sol Campbell, Terry, Ashley Cole, forward from that, Joe Cole. There was individuals, but I don't think there was the depth that there is now. And that is the thing that concerns me, is that Gareth Southgate is just going with what is tried and tested before. And Jordan Henderson might have done very, very well for England. He's done very, very well for Liverpool, but he's now playing in the Saudi League, which is completely up to him where he goes. I know Neymar's gone over there as well as Cristiano Ronaldo, but they might be playing against each other. But again, there is not that strength in depth in that league. No. So you have got a lot of players. Effectively, it's like putting those players like Henderson, Ronaldo, Neymar in League Two. That's the equivalent of it. That's the equivalent of it. And what we really need is players that are playing at the very highest level. But secondly, Gareth Southgate is lucky. He's got the strongest England squad for some time. There might not be the massive name at the moment, like a Beckham. The Beckham was an outstanding player, but he was an outstanding player in a team that isn't as good as the England team is now in depth. And personally, I think, Southgate needs to look at that and go, right, okay, I should trust these players more. like you say, Tamori. Um, Tamori is a fantastic player. You've got Mark Guéhi at Crystal Palace. I was pleased that he was chosen for that Scotland game. But these are players that really are the future, Manny, aren't they? And these are the players that, if we want to win a World Cup, we need to take a 22 man squad to the US, Canada, and Mexico. Take that 22-man squad and be like, if something happens, we're not concerned because we've got somebody there who can easily just slot into that position. And we've got a manager that will utilize that, not a manager who will go, oh, that's a bit of a hassle. We're going to have to change the whole system, which it feels like Southgate will. We need somebody to go, right, okay, take that man into the squad, and the squad works around. And there is one man who I think can do that, who is English, and who will he take the job? I think he's having a whale of a time up north at the moment, but at the same time, if the England job comes knocking and the money is right, and let's be honest, he's proven himself both here and at Newcastle. I say it now, if Eddie Howe took us into the next World Cup, we stand a very good chance.
A big call, mind you, a very big call. And if he were to, of course, manage England, I think one of the biggest calls he'd make would be to drop Jordan Pickford and put his own man, Nick Pope, in. Of course, that would come at the expense of the former Cherry and Aaron Ramsdale. But given that Ramsdale is, of course, in his mid-20s, you'd have to think that, at least in theory, the future would be his. The only issue I have, and I think I mentioned this before, mate, is that the Saudi owners are not going to allow England to come, knocking on their door to try and prize Eddie Howe from their cold, dead fingers, unless the money is, right. It would literally have to be a king's ransom, a Saudi king's ransom, if you will. I really shouldn't say it that way because, I mean, that could be, an outrageous thing to say, but it's just a mention of it's just an attempt to try and emphasize the point that I don't think there's anywhere near enough money that the FA can offer to try and take Eddie Howe away. Having said that, though, Newcastle haven't really had the best of starts of the season. After their excellent 5-1 win, where they completely pasted Unai Emery's Aston Villa, they ended up suffering a pretty unfortunate run of results where they lost to City at the Etihad and then contrived, of course, to lose to 10-man Liverpool, who had Virgil van Dijk sent off and who should have had TAA sent off, Trent Alexander-Arnold. And that same Liverpool team, of course, I'm really sorry to mention this, had to depend on a great deal of good fortune to beat Bournemouth, it must be said. Brilliant save from Neto from the Salah penalty, but just unfortunate that he couldn't stop the rebound. But Newcastle still will need to try to weather that particular storm, and I did predict that they would see a bit of a drop-off given how they overachieved last season, and especially with other teams having, regrouped and strengthened. Newcastle are going to find it perhaps a little bit tough, I would say. But going back to Eddie Howe, I think he's going to probably try and wait for this particular season. And this could be a decent time for him because the Saudi owners are not going to be necessarily patient with him, especially if the drop-off is fairly huge in that, God, heaven forbid, of course, for Toon fans, they fail to qualify for Europe and don't win a title. It could very well be that the owners decide, you know what, Eddie, you've been wonderful for us, but it's time for us to level up a little bit. And then, of course, the timing would be right because Southgate will be on his way out. Eddie can come in and maybe freshen up the team a bit. I just think, though, that it may be easy for managers to make big calls at club level. At international level, sometimes it just seems to me that loyalty ends up becoming more and more of the order of the day. One reason why I do remember Bobby Robson as a fine manager, and I have fond memories of Italia 90, is, I don't know, how old were you then, mate?
I'm 37, 38 this year.
5 years, 4 or 5 years younger than me, but you should remember Italia '90
Yes.
at least, if not Euro '88. Now, I didn't see Euro '88, and if I had, I wouldn't have been very happy because I remember that particular team was exceptionally strong. A lot of fine players in that team. They
Mhm.
were even favourites to win the title, but luck wasn't on their side. I believe they, lost to the Republic of Ireland with Ray Houghton scoring the winner and Mick McCarthy completely making Brian Clough eat humble pie. They lost to an overpowering Holland team with Marco van Basten scoring a hat trick, and they couldn't even get a consolation win against the USSR. So played three, lost three. They took the early flight home, and Robson had his job under threat. So what he did was axe several players like Glenn Hoddle, Kenny Sansom, Viv Anderson, and a few others, making sure that they would never play for England again, and brought some new players in to try and freshen up the team. So there wasn't going to be any question of, loyalties to certain players. If you weren't going to perform well enough, you were going to lose your place. And if someone who came in for you took his chance, he'd stay in. Perfect example, of course, being a certain David Platt, who
Yeah.
went on to play for Arsenal. And he came in, of course, as a replacement for Steve McMahon, who didn't really cover himself with
Mhm.
glory in the Italia '90 opener against the Republic of Ireland when he ended up allowing Kevin Sheedy to score that equaliser. And I talk about Bobby Robson with affection. God rest his soul. That Italia '90 side was, in my opinion, one of the best England sides I'd ever seen. Um, we should have gone all the way, and that semi-final will forever be an absolute heartbreaker. 2002 under Ericsson was also pretty
Yeah.
good because we had strength in depth, enough strength in depth that we decided not to pick Steve McManaman and Andrew Cole in the squad. But we just couldn't quite go all the way. Trevor Sinclair coming in for Owen Hargreaves, it still didn't halt our progress, and we went on to. We should have gone further. Had we beaten Brazil, I believe we would have gone all the way.
Yeah.
But again, it's the lack of ruthlessness from certain managers and the lack of imagination that really, really angers me in a way. And after Bobby Robson, I don't think we ever really had an England manager who was willing to be fairly ruthless in that respect. Maybe
Mhm.
Glenn Hoddle to an extent at France '98, but he was never really popular with all of the players, and he struck a lot of people as being a little bit, eccentric. Venables could have been quite good, but he was never going to be, too interested to stay in the job. So we've got some problems, and if Eddie Howe could potentially take the England job when Southgate leaves, but it could also very well be that they may decide to move for another potential big name, someone who's a little
Yeah.
bit younger, who can try and freshen up the team a little bit. And it should also be mentioned that Germany sacked Hansi Flick and after going back to Rudi Völler as an interim boss, of course, who managed the team in that 2002 World Cup, and they went on to reach the final, losing to that Brazil team. They ended up beating France, which is an absolute shocker. Although when you consider that Kylian Mbappe wasn't playing, there is a slight drop off. You see,
Yeah.
but it could very well be that the FA decides to look for a more proven name who's won silverware at club level, who certainly knows how to communicate with players. And while I take the point that international football doesn't have the day-to-day or the week-to-week interaction the club football would have, I'd like to think that these managers in question would find a way to somehow make it work. Of course, Hansi Flick couldn't do that despite his success with Bayern Munich. But again, it just goes to show that there is a little bit of a leveling there, and I think his decision to keep faith with Kai Havertz ended up costing him. So Arteta, if you're watching this, there's a lesson for you to learn here. 65 million quid for what?
To be honest, it's two different type of management styles, isn't it? Really, this international football,
Yeah,
because like you mentioned there, Hansi Flick, did a fantastic job at Bayern Munich and was exceptional there, but couldn't get a German team, working. Which, let's be honest, it's not the greatest of German teams, but there's still quality in that squad. There's still quality and enough quality to get results against Japan, and I think there's only three teams that they've beaten up until that point last week. And I think one was Oman, wasn't it? One
Yes.
was Costa Rica, and there was another. And it was like, well, these are the three teams that you'd expect them to be. But you look at the teams that they've been beaten by, you'd expect Germany to be right up there. Um, and another manager that has been linked with the England job, and of course we'll come on to what he's done at Man City as well, no doubt, is Pep Guardiola. Now, I think this sounds crazy, but if it happens, Pep Guardiola is one of the best managers in the world at club level. Can he transition that into international football when he hasn't got no money to spend? He's picking from a limited pool of players and a good quality pool of players. But what I'm saying there is it's not a pool of players which you can't go out and buy the next Erling Haaland for England. You have to find somebody who fits a role within your national team squad. Is there a danger that, bringing in somebody like that for massive amounts of money, because let's be honest, Pep Guardiola isn't going to do it for cheap. That's a big risk, surely. And surely that's a big risk on his behalf as well, about tarnishing his reputation, like Hansi Flick's found.
I wouldn't go so far to say that it would tarnish his reputation per se. Although, if you take a look at what happened with Fabio Capello, his stint with England was, better best forgotten. And
Mm-hmm.
when you take a look at it in its entirety, it wasn't really that much better than Steve McLaren's stint with
Yeah.
us, where he, made some controversial decisions and ended up failing to qualify England for Euro 2008. And that was, of course, a tournament where we didn't see a single British Isles team take part in that, which was really, something which I absolutely hated. So
No,
I didn't even know who I could possibly support in those championships, mind you.
wasn't
And
the Croatia game that one? Wasn't it? That
yes, the
knocked us out.
Croatia game.
Yeah, the Wally with a brolly or something.
Oh, yes, 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 yes. And that is a name which has deservedly stuck with him.
Yeah.
That game I remember fairly well. I think Paul Robinson, whose position had been under scrutiny, had a bit of a shocker in training. So at the last moment, McLaren decided to drop him and play Scott Carson instead. Fat lot of good that did, conceding that first goal from a free kick. And then, of course, Capello came in with a Sergeant Major style, with all his all the trophies he won back in Italy,
Yeah.
and didn't really do much better in his own right.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the John Terry scandal didn't work. I never really liked the player anyway. Never should have been captain for England ahead of someone like Sol Campbell or even Steven Gerrard. But Capello was never really willing to get to grips with the culture or or even the language per se. And he thought that by being a little bit too strict, he would get the players to, fall into line. And that Sergeant Major method doesn't really work too well, it has to be said. You've got to find a way to be able to relate more with your players and also try and get them on your side, but while also being able to lay down the law and let them know who's boss, sort of like the way Eddie Howe's done with Newcastle, a bit like how Ange Postecoglou has done with Tottenham. It could very well be, as I said, that the FA may go in for a proven name who's proven himself in the Premiership, and that segues into Guardiola. One thing I do like about him is that he can be ruthless towards certain players if their form dictates that they deserve to be dropped. And he had nothing has stopped him from making some very big calls. With an England connection, of course, the very first thing he did was tell Joe Hart, "Sorry, son, you are a fine shot stopper, but I want to have a goalkeeper who's capable of playing from the back, and I don't think you can do that. So I'm going to send you on your way. And you're welcome to find another club elsewhere where you can play football. I wish you nothing but luck." But that pretty much, signaled the beginning of the decline of Joe Hart in a way, and
Yeah.
he was never really able to rediscover the confidence that he had. I'm glad that he's enjoying himself up in Scotland with Celtic, winning titles left, right, and centre, and he should have a really a strong ending to his career, at least with all those trophies at Celtic. Of course, his England days, I think, at least as long as Southgate is at the helm, are pretty much done and dusted. Although you think that, given that he hasn't pushed 40 yet, he could still do a job. And there are still doubts over Jordan Pickford. I'm sorry, but I don't really think Ramsdale is necessarily the answer here. And I still don't really have. I mean, Pope might be decent at a lot of other things, but with his feet, he's not really the best. And I don't really know how Sam Johnston or Dean Henderson will do. But Guardiola can be ruthless. That's probably the only thing
Yeah.
that could work. And he will be the type of person to say to someone like a Henderson, look, mate, you've been a great servant, but I don't think you can, cut it anymore. I'm going to have to end your international career. Thanks for the memories. Now go and pick up your millions over in Saudi. And that is the type of ruthlessness that we may need. The only issue I have is sometimes he may take that ruthlessness a bit too far. I don't
Mhm.
know how good a man manager he is. And but at least when it comes to England, if there is a need for some wholesale changes and for some, younger players to be brought in who are hungry and who want to play, while some older players might, be best moved on, he could prove to be that person. I just hope he doesn't have a falling out with too many players because um, even at Manchester City, there will be a sort of a leadership group of players that he has. England will also pretty much have the same thing with guys like Kane, Pickford, Maguire, Henderson, or whoever have you. He shouldn't antagonize too many people. The only problem is he's on a good salary at Manchester City. I
Yeah.
was expecting that he would quit City if he failed to win the Champions League, but now that he's done that, he's not going anywhere, and City aren't going to be willing to sell him. He might decide when it could be time to leave Manchester City, and even then, I think he would sooner consider managing Spain than England. Um,
Mhm.
Other examples I could think of, someone like maybe, and I did suggest this, someone like a Thomas Tuchel, who is, of course, now at
Yes.
Bayern Munich, but given the scrutiny that he's under, anything less than, a good run in the Champions League and defending their Bundesliga title could very well see him sent on his way. And they're
Yeah.
quite ruthless as well, how they got rid of Nagelsmann to bring him in and how they got rid of Oliver Kahn and Hassan Salihamidzic, I think that's how you pronounce it, on the final day of the season. They're a club, as Harry Kane himself said, who make it clear that losing is not really an option. Of course, that doesn't mean that they won't lose. Of course, they will lose every game every now and then, but it's how they recover from that and what they do that matters. So Tuchel could be an option. I think a Jurgen Klopp would also, maybe fit the bill. I just hope he doesn't continue to pick Henderson and TAA and a few others. But uh,
Just for old
he
time's sake.
maybe, but I mean, but listen, if Liverpool were ruthless enough to tell Henderson that he wouldn't have much of
Yeah.
a role at Anfield, then I'm pretty certain that Klopp will be also a little bit ruthless in a way. But again, you know, every club manager will have their favourites, and that's going to be the worst part. So the FA had better do some planning right now because when Southgate leaves, there will be a gap that has to be filled. Believe you me.
And I think it makes sense that the manager, whoever comes in, has managed in England. Fabio Capello had never done that. Sven Goran Eriksson had never done that before. But actually, moving on to this weekend and our opponents as well, especially, which is Chelsea, of course. And you mentioned him there, Thomas Tuchel was in charge of Chelsea at the start of last season. Then they got rid of him, bought in Graham Potter. That didn't work. They had the worst season that they've had for years, and now are with Pochettino. And my thought process, and I mentioned this to Michael Greco as well, of course, the actor who played Beppe DeMarco in EastEnders yesterday. But one thing I did mention to him was that with Graham Potter, yep, Chelsea fans weren't happy, but did he deserve that little bit more time? Because at the same time, managing Brighton is completely different to managing Chelsea. Chelsea, there's an expectation to win things, to be in the Champions League, the instant success. Whereas at Brighton, there isn't that. And now that's put Pochettino in a situation where he's got a squad full of these players that are worth millions upon millions upon millions. Of course, Chelsea have been working through the loopholes for a good 12 months since Bowley joined. But do you feel that, in a way, this Todd Bowley has to really stand by Pochettino, come what may? They're not going to get relegated. They're not going to get relegated. Are they going to get European football? Possibly not. And surely he's got to stand by Pochettino if that happens.
One thing which will be in Poch's favour is that the season is barely 4 games old.
Yeah.
And of course, let's not forget that Luton have had a game postponed, so I think they've only played about 3.
Yeah.
So to make any kind of judgments immediately based on, the first 4 games of the season would be a little bit crass. And let's also not forget that Chelsea have once again tried to, solve their own problems the only way they can. Offloading several players so they can stay within the FFP rules, and then shell out a boatload of money to get players to join them.
Yeah.
I believe, of course, last season they spent over 100 million bob to get Enzo Fernandez. They spent a bit more than that to get Moises Caicedo. And on the face of it, you would think that those two together would be the perfect central defensive midfield partnership. But although in Enzo's case, I believe Scaloni likes to use him as more of an attacking midfielder, I think that might very well be the case. Him and McAllister working together in the middle, they normally do really well, especially in that 4-4-2 system that Scaloni used in Qatar. And again, talking about Chelsea, another issue they have, obviously, is that their defence is quite creaky. The decision to give Reece James the captaincy and Ben Chilwell the vice-captaincy is pretty much blown up in their faces because James is injured. And they've still got Thiago Silva on the books. Yes, he's still performing well and doing the business, but I do believe that this will be his final season because age will catch up with everyone. And, you can't go on forever. And again, it's a sort of a misguided transfer policy in a way where they never were really willing to strengthen in an area that needed strengthening, i.e. their defence. And now, of course, they've sent Kepa Arrizabalaga on loan to Real Madrid, of all places. Good luck to them. I mean, Kepa's going to have the time of his life, though, under Ancelotti, and I think they're top of La Liga anyway, so make of that what you will. Edward Mendy, the Champions League hero, has gone off to Saudi as well. So they've got Robert Sanchez and a couple of other goalkeepers whose names I can't even be bothered to try and recollect right now. It's as if you've got a squad which is sort of middle and top heavy, but bottom light, as it were, bottom light in terms of the defense. And they haven't really been willing to strengthen in that particular area. And when you get those types of talents in your team, like Caicedo and Fernandez or whatever, Nicholas Jackson, of course, I can't forget him, and others, they can gel well in the middle, but at the back, they're going to be exceptionally weak. And against Nottingham Forest, when they lost at Stamford Bridge, it was a case of a lack of concentration more than anything else. The fact that Cucurella is still on the books is really a surprise. They brought in Axel Disasi, who doesn't even start for France, ahead of Theo Hernandez or Benjamin Pavard or whoever have you. I think Disasi is a left back, so he'd be behind Theo and Lucas Hernandez in the pecking order. So Chelsea have all sorts of problems, and they're going to have to, really find a way to try and get the squad to gel quite a bit. And they just, I think if I were Poch, I would tell them, I know you lot have some talent and ability and you know how to play. You just need to make sure that you play cohesively. And so I would have given Thiago Silva at least the vice captaincy, because obviously his experience of having played and captained Brazil, he'd be the type of person to at least get the team together, and he's still performing quite well, mind you. There's a lack of leadership in that team, you see. And
Mhm.
I don't see anyone being willing or able to try and, drag the team and say, you know what, we've got to do this. We've got to move on. Losing Kovacic to Manchester City is also a bit of a blow, because he was another player who could, in some ways, drive the team forward and is also exceptionally experienced internationally, having earned, I want to say, about 80 or so caps with Croatia. Maybe
Mm.
he's earned more, I think. And again, it's a lack of leadership, which hasn't really been addressed more than anything else. So I think Pochettino is going to really have to do a lot of work to try to get the team united. But if Eugene were here, he'd tell you that when he was in his heyday with Tottenham, he was able to really, get the team behind him, and they loved working together as a unit, culminating in that memorable season in 2019 when they obviously, got top four at our expense and reached the UEFA Champions League final. And
Yeah.
when you think that as an Arsenal fan, we were actually hoping that Spurs would win, because it meant that we'd end up, going in as the fifth place team, you just think how the world was turned on its head at that time.
Yeah.
But obviously, not long afterwards, the wheels started to fall off a bit. Poch was sacked. Mourinho came in. Things didn't improve, and Spurs have been on a downward spiral since. Um, Chelsea don't have the Poch of Tottenham then. They've got a new Poch now, who obviously feels as though he has a point to prove. But with
Yeah.
a squad lacking in any kind of leadership in that particular sense, you just wonder how they can really find it in themselves to try and drive themselves forward. Um, Sterling could be an option to captain the team, but I think he'd want to concentrate on his own form. And yeah, it is James and Chilwell, of course, who are captains, but Thiago Silva is the vice captain, and no one else really has that that gravitas to really drag the team and say, you know what, we need to be better than this. So losing Kovacic is a bit of a blow. Mudrak is probably low on confidence. I think he got injured playing for the Ukraine against
Mhm.
us, and so that's sort of the problem. You see, it's a problem that Chelsea have with leadership and motivation. Someone has to get in there and drag them and say, you know what, we've got to really move forward and be better than this. And with Chilwell, I mean, with James injured and Chilwell not really being able to be that dominating personality, I think Silva should be given the armband at least for quite some time, and he should be the one to try to get the team to really, you know, pick themselves up and move forward. And of course, they're coming up against the Bournemouth team, and I'm sure you'll be talking about this, who
Yeah.
have looked good in patches, but haven't really had the results that they feel that they deserve. And I will segue back to you right now, because I've said what I said about Chelsea. I think their lack of leadership will hurt them, and they could very well be ripe for the picking if you're able to, get in under their skin. But coming back to you as a Bournemouth fan, you'd be the best person to tell me how you like this team under Iraola, what you think of the style of play, and do you believe that results will be on their way?
Personally, I think the football's a little bit more exciting. It seems a little bit more linked together. Um, I think there's a lot less about luck about it. However, and this is where it all boils down to, and every single, every single football fan is going to say the same. It's all well and good playing beautiful football, but if you don't get the results and you don't get 38 points at the end of the season, which is normally the figure to keep you up, you get relegated. And let's be fair, Burnley did it for years, where they were grotty. They weren't a particularly nice team to watch. It was long ball, it was anti football, it was horrible, but they always got there. and they always got. And there was a lot of teams throughout the years, who were relegated at Burnley's expense because Burnley got the points. Burnley got the points playing like that. Um, have we got leaders at the club? See, this is another thing you got to throw at Bournemouth, because I was looking at the Chelsea squad that faced Bayern Munich in that 2012 Champions League final, and you've got to say that there was a l- so many, so many leaders on that pitch. You had Petr Cech in goal, Didier Drogba, Solomon Kalou, on the bench, Fernando Torres, John Noby Mikel, Ashley Cole, Frank Lampard, you know, they had quality. Michael Essien, how could I forget him? So they had so many leaders. Do AFC Bournemouth have a leader at the moment? And that is my big question. We've got a lot of young talent. Zabania could well be a leader in the future. Senesi probably are, or the most experienced leader. Adam Smith, we can't really put in there because he's injured at the moment, but we know what Adam Smith brings to the side. Max Aarons, again, youngster, good quality youngster, but again, is he a leader? And I think every side that is successful has that leader in it. And you look at that Burnley side, they had several. They had Ashley Barnes, they had Tarkowski, they had players that would pick up the rest of the team week on week when things were getting tough. And I do question whether or not we've got that at the moment. We've got the talent. Would you agree with me, Manny? We've got the talent, but have we got the leaders?
Well, I mean, look no further than your goalkeeper, Morara Neto.
Neto,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
I do get the feeling in some ways, Craig, that maybe the captaincy is putting a little bit of pressure on him, perhaps, because,
Hmm.
he's still capable of producing some excellent saves, but you often get the feeling when you take a look at him that he's got, a bit more weight on his shoulders and he feels a little bit under pressure to perform. I remember saying on several of our streams that the decision to take the captaincy away from Lloyd Kelly and give it to Neto was actually a masterstroke because
Yeah.
it brought out in many ways the best in him, and some of the saves he made and how he was able to drive the team on with his own experience was just outstanding in many ways. It allowed Kelly to focus more on his game. And Smith also, although he was a little bit more peripheral, I think, in the second half of the season, he also had some of his moments. The big problem now is, of course, Kelly and Smith. I think Kelly's been benched, I think, and
Yeah.
Smith has also been injured, as you say. So I wouldn't say that there is no one leader in the team because Neto has performed that role brilliantly, but
Hmm.
there needs to be a leadership group, and it needs
Yeah.
to comprise of some people who obviously have played at the club for quite some time and know what it entails. And if you have that certain group, they can be trusted in many ways to try to bring the club up. You wonder about someone like maybe a Solanke or a Billing, who always, Billing in particular is still one of your most consistent players. Someone
Mm.
like maybe a Tavernier, who a lot of us thought would end up leaving, but is still with the squad. Iriola does have a decent group of players, and in fact, I'm going to take a look at the Bournemouth squad right now and see if there is if there is that sort of hierarchy in terms of the leadership and who the options are. Because, yeah, it is in fact Neto who's captaining the team. Adam Smith, of course, with all his experience, over 300 appearances, is the vice captain, but he is now injured. Followed by two Welshman internationals, of course, in Chris Mepham and Davy Brooks. So
Yeah.
it could very well. I mean, Mepham, of course, I don't know how often he plays, but Brooks is now wonderfully back in the picture, and of course, has been wonderful to see him come back into the Welsh team, in a storm. And I believe he scored against Latvia, if memory serves me right. So there is that group. And maybe someone like Darren Randolph, who both you and Matt said was good at performing the role that Scott Carson is doing at Manchester City. With his experience, 50 caps for the Republic of Ireland, starter at Euro 2016, and also having played a lot of Premiership football and has that experience, he could also serve as, in some ways, a leader more off the field, sort of like how Tom Heaton has been doing for Manchester United. So what Iraola needs to do is trust this leadership group a lot more and
Yeah.
make sure that they avoid getting any real injuries. I think the loss of Steve Cook, Lewis's brother, was a loss in a way. It was tragic how things didn't quite work out for him at Forest, and I think Matt made
Mm.
also mentioned that he had since secured a move to Queen's Park Rangers. But
Yes.
he was, of course, a long-time captain, as you will know, of Bournemouth, and to lose him was also a bit of a loss in a way. But once you identify that leadership group and bring someone like a Solanke or a Billing in who have always performed very well, Senesi, as you mentioned, could be another option.
Yeah.
Bring them in and sort of have them, take more of an initiative in leading training sessions or what have you. Then you could possibly have um, a strong group which could take the team forward, because Neto is a fine leader, but he needs all the help and support he can get. And whether it's going to come from the likes of Mepham or Brooks, who are at least playing a lot more regularly than Smith and Kelly. In fact, Kelly isn't even one of the vice captains now. So
No.
who it's going to come from will remain to be seen. But a leadership group has got to be identified, stuck with, and given all the trust that they can get from the manager. And if he can do that, that's fine. And of course, having played and managed in Spain, he'll know that the biggest clubs themselves have had big leadership groups themselves. So he's going to have to sort of form something similar at Bournemouth. Not necessarily like at Athletic Bilbao, where he played, or Vallecano, where he managed, but something almost to that point, if you know what I mean.
Talking about Lloyd Kelly as well, and Lloyd Kelly is coming for a lot of criticism from our fans. To be honest, after our game against Burnley last season in the FA Cup, he was poor. He was poor. He had a ropey game. Nothing seemed to work. But after that, and after taking that captaincy off him, his performance is improved. But again, the Bournemouth fans seem to be hounding him for very little reason. For very little reason. I know Lloyd Kelly is not everybody's cup of tea, not their favourite player, but when it shows something when you have got Spurs and, of course, former manager Eddie Howe at Newcastle interested in a player. Lloyd Kelly has still got a hell of a lot to offer this football club. And even though maybe, yes, he's gone down the pecking order because Kirkes is looking good, if something happens to Kirkes, surely, you know, he's got to be somebody you could turn to and say he will be able to do a job.
The problem with that, in practicality, is that although his performances recovered brilliantly last season, Bournemouth had Gary O'Neill. They didn't have
Yeah.
Andoni Iraola. So I believe Iraola has selected his first few teams this season based on what he's seen in training, and there's a reason why Kelly's been left out. And it is harsh on the guy, and I think, given the service he's given to Bournemouth and what he's contributed as captain, he does deserve a little bit of respect. But I mean, certainly a lot more than what he's getting. But
Yeah.
that's one of the harsh realities of football, as you know, Craig. Once you find yourself out on the fringes and someone takes your place and does better than you, it's going to be very difficult for you to find your way back. And that's sort of how it's worked out for him. But there should be more games. I do believe Bournemouth are still in the League Cup. There will be the FA Cup to play.
Yeah.
And of course, as you mentioned, if, heaven forbid, something were to happen to Kirkies, Kelly should be an option, as should Mepham and one or two others. But again, there are only 4 games that have been played. And, players are going to have to be, confident and strong enough in the knowledge that there will be more games to play and they will have some more chances. Look, we're facing the same problem right now at Arsenal with Arteta having to make sure he shoehorns Kai Havertz into the team every single game because, we, in our infinite wisdom,
Mhm.
quotation marks, splashed out a good 65 million bob for him. And so we're also paying him a ransom of a salary, maybe not a king's ransom per se, but whatever. So it's that obligation that he somehow has to start every game. I'd like to think that Arteta would be smart enough to see the light and say, you know what, Kai, it's not working, son. I'm going to start bringing you off the bench. I can't have you starting every game. If it means clogging up the system and things not really working effectively. And because Havertz has to play, we see the system sort of being built around him, which is costing the likes of Gabriel Magalhaes and Leandro Trossard several games. And Trossard in particular has to be credited with winning us the Community Shield, because had it not been for his deflected finish, we wouldn't have gone to the penalty shootout. And
Yeah.
then, City completely fluffed their lines. And his reward has just been, he hasn't started. He's had a few cameos. He started against Fulham, didn't do too much wrong, but was ruthlessly hooked off. And there are several players who haven't really featured. All we can say though is that there should be some chances, but with Tierney having gone out on loan, several of us, myself included, are hopping mad. So I guess we're just being a little bit impatient for certain players to get more of the game time and the recognition that they deserve. All we can do is tell ourselves, you know what, they will get their chances eventually. So Lloyd Kelly should get his chances. And I'll tell you what, given Bournemouth's form, if results still continue to go, a little bit against them, I
Yeah.
wouldn't be surprised if Areola decides to say, you know what, maybe we could do with a bit of a shake-up, because he doesn't know these players very well, having worked with them basically over the course of the summer, and of course now these first few weeks. So he wouldn't be afraid to make a few big calls to try and shake things up a little bit if he feels that it's the need of the hour. So Kelly should get his chances, and he will get his chances. But if he doesn't get too much game time this season, or over the course of this season until January, then I wouldn't be surprised if he decides to hand in a transfer request, and eventually, reluctantly, the club says, you know what, if you want to leave, we won't stand in your way. So there's still a lot of things that can happen. All we can do, I mean, speaking from a Bournemouth perspective,
Mhm.
I think, because you're right, I would like to keep Kelly if I were a Bournemouth supporter. But all we can do now is just watch and wait and see if he does get some opportunities to play and how well he does.
I think our fans have to be patient though, because we have got 2 points, 4 games played. The 2 points were against Brentford last time out. Of course, start of the season against West Ham at home. But we've also played Liverpool, who seem to be doing all right, and a rampant Spurs at the moment. And this month is going to get no easier. So, of course, we're playing Chelsea on Sunday. Following Sunday, we've got Brighton. And then, of course, we've got Arsenal. Yeah, we've got Stoke City in the cup in between that. We should get a result against them. So that is September. And we could be 7 games in. And providing that those the three well, two of the three teams have got international football, European football, Chelsea being the exception, of course, in this case. Um, it could well be that we could be on 2 points, with literally 7 games played. But I think the fans have to be patient with Iriola, because you look at the following games: Everton away, Wolves at home, Burnley at home. Now, that is where I think we'll be able to judge Iriola. Those 3 games, because Everton are poor, Everton are terrible. Regardless of what anybody says to me, I still am adamant Everton are one of the worst 3 sides in this division this season, because Sheffield United should have beaten them. Wolves, I think Gary O'Neill keep them up, but are they particularly good side? They're going to be scrapping. I think they're going to be down there. They they're going to be in that relegation battle. And I think Burnley will as well, because I haven't seen really, I thought Burnley would be fine, but I haven't really seen that much from them so far. I haven't seen what, we expected. But do you agree with me, Manny, that we've just got to be patient? Bill Foley's made this decision to get rid of Gary O'Neill and bring in Iriola, and if we still are on 2 points after these 7 games, it's not a panic of, you know, everything's going wrong. It's a case of we've got to win those 3 games because they're 3 winnable games.
Yeah, several people to whom I've spoken on the issue of Iriola were delighted. I mean, wouldn't say delighted, but they welcomed the decision to replace Gary with Andoni because
Yeah,
they obviously did their scouting on him and thought that it was wonderful that Bournemouth were being so ambitious in bringing a guy who would play such attacking football. And I think
mm,
you pretty much mentioned it. Sometimes some of the football that was played under O'Neill was a little bit tiresome to watch, but
yeah,
you got the results you needed and you stayed up. And of course, the mitigating circumstances of starting the season so horribly and seeing Scott Parker getting sacked, you know, a lot of people will try to pretend to be wise and say, O'Neill did have enough time to work with the team. So some of the results especially near the end of last season, were quite awful. Had you at least drawn or won those games, you could have been higher up the table. But when you make a big decision like that to get rid of the manager who at least, you know, did his part by ensuring that Bournemouth would stay in and also avoided any kind of disaster in terms of exiting the Premier League and having formed that kind of a relationship with the players. There was a part of me that hoped that O'Neill would have built on the momentum gained, but clearly Bowley thought otherwise and wanted to have a new challenge. But as with Potter at Chelsea, it's a case of, you've made your bed, you lie in it. Bowley
mm,
found that out, and so will Foley find that out. And that's going to be the issue here. Because going back to Potter now, obviously, I'm one of those people who believe that he never should have taken up the Chelsea job.
mm,
Because he should have known that he was going to be on a hiding to nothing there. And it was obviously going to be a different standard playing managing at Brighton than managing at Chelsea. And of course, if he was to sort of look back and take a look at how Brighton have been under De Zerbi and how they've played, he'll probably look at himself and kick himself. But then there's a part of him that says, "No, I had to make the decision to move forward, and I actually left Brighton in a much better state than when I joined." So maybe he has that satisfaction. But joining Chelsea was always going to be a bit of a problem, and there's a part of me that will always think that maybe coming into the Premier League, which is a different style of football to La Liga, Iriola was always going to be on a hiding to nothing, as Unai Emery himself found out when he joined Arsenal. So, in short, I'd like to think that Foley, with progress, tangible progress in an improvement in the style of football, and a great deal of commitment, and realizes that any losses will not be down to poor play from the team, then maybe it could be considered. But again, football is a ruthless business, and especially if you consider that a manager may end up having a poor run of results because the teams against his team plays are just powerhouses, and they just don't have luck on their side. You can look at that, and there can be a part of you that says you sometimes have to have a little bit of leeway, but then if you continue to go on that run, it might sap the team's confidence. And so it's a difficult question. I can't give you the answer immediately. I'd like to think that once Bournemouth get these games out of the way and have a somewhat more manageable run, for want of a better word, in the Premiership, and maybe do some good things in the Cups, we could see Iriola start to turn a corner and maybe work their way up the table. And if it's any consolation, I don't think Gary O'Neill's Wolves are doing that much better either. But having made a big decision to replace him with Iraola and put a lot of investment and a lot of hope into him, I can definitely understand the level of disappointment. I only hope that Foley doesn't do what Bowley did and sort of say enough is enough far too soon. But Bowley never should have sacked Tuchel and hired Potter in the first place. Tuchel would have done a decent job with them, and it just threw the team into turmoil. And sacking Iraola too early could very well throw the team into some type of turmoil. But he doesn't want to leave it too late, in that Bournemouth will be, hopefully not, in a relegation battle. So it's a difficult question to answer. I think in the short term, you stick with it. It's as simple as that. You just have to trust what the manager's doing.
Yeah, and I think the style of football is excellent, and Iraola, has got so many credentials. I guess it's a case of how quickly does Bill Foley want that success, and I guess he didn't see that in Gary O'Neill, and like going back to that point when Gary O'Neill was sacked, and I was really disappointed because the people being mentioned at the time was Jesse Marsh, Frank Lampard, Steven Gerrard. There was a couple more that was being mentioned, but as soon as Iraola was mentioned, it was like, right, okay, I know who this guy is. We know what he did at Rayo Vallecano. With a budget probably similar to that of Luton Town's, and he did a very, very good job. But again, is it a case that Bill Foley is going to want that instant success? I want to see progress this year. Don't get me wrong, I don't think he's going to expect Europe this year, but is he going to want that success and that step up, or will he be happy with finishing in a similar sort of position as last year, but progress on the pitch and then push forwards? But hopefully, fingers crossed as well. And you did mention there as well, Wolves. I wish Wolves the very, very best this season, because I would like to see Gary O'Neill do well, and he deserves it. And I think his Wolves side, against Manchester United, were very unlucky. Of course, he got the 3 points as well. So he's got 3 points in the bag. It's going to be a tough job. It's going to be a slog for him, but I'm hoping Wolves can keep their noses clear of the drop zone. But
not at your expense, though. Let's make that very clear.
No. Exactly. Hopefully,
Mate,
we'll be quite away from
you need to be glad that I'm here to have your back. And everything you said about Gary O'Neill, obviously, when he took the Wolves job as well, he knew that he was going to be on a hiding to nothing, given everything that went on, especially with Lopetegui being forced to leave and several of their top players, including Ruben Neves, also leaving. So how he works with this Wolves team will be interesting to see. And going back to your original question on the instant success that Foley might want, I remember telling you on several occasions that Foley's no fool. He will have got himself immersed in the history of Bournemouth Football Club, and also the AFC Bournemouth, I should say. Sorry about that. And also he will have understood how they normally operate in a way, and the type of football they normally play.
Yeah.
And when Eddie Howe obviously was at Dean Court, the success that the team had during those years was effectively finishing middle of the table, getting some excellent victories against some top sides, punching above your weight. And I think in Foley's eyes, anything would be better than finishing in the bottom half, having survived a relegation fight. Foley's going to want an improvement on a relegation dogfight. He'll want to see the club finish somewhere like maybe a 14th or 15th or even 12th or 13th, or maybe a little bit higher, maybe a decent cup run, sort of the same. I wouldn't necessarily say the same expectations that Newcastle had with Howe, because obviously when Howe came into Newcastle, they were in dire straits, having let go of Steve Bruce, and they were in a dreadful position.
Yeah.
He brought them all the way up to 11th and earned their trust, and then taking them to 4th the following season was just magnificent. Bournemouth doesn't have a Saudi ownership. It has American ownership. And hopefully, as I've said, Foley will be a lot more sensible and say, you know what, I want to see Bournemouth improve and get better, because I know that we're better than we showed last season. And maybe the decision to get rid of Gary O'Neill was a sign of saying that, life moves on and we have to demand more of ourselves. We can't have more of the same. And I just think that O'Neill would have been a little bit more limited. So we have to make an ambitious choice, which is why I said in my my previous answer to your previous question, he has to, stick with Iraola at least for the foreseeable future, depending on how many games that may be. But Foley also, if he's sensible, will have expectations of on-pitch improvement, not necessarily a big improvement, but enough to say that the club will not be in a relegation dogfight. And if they can go on a decent cup run and maybe say the League Cup or even the FA Cup, that would be a wonderful bonus. But Foley should be a little bit more sensible. And, Chelsea, with their history, of course, having been European Cup champions, of course, Champions League winners, I should say, within about, in a period of 10 years apart, I'd like to think, 2012, 2021, and they've won some league titles in between and some other pieces of silverware. Chelsea and Bournemouth are like chalk and cherries.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I said it that way. So Bournemouth obviously don't really haven't had too much of a history, at least recently, of winning some very big things. But obviously Foley wants to try to take the team forward. But as I've said it many times, he has to go about it in a more sensible way. Even if he were to bring someone like Carlo Ancelotti into the team, the way Everton were ambitious enough to do, he'd be sensible enough to not expect miracles immediately. But mind you, Ancelotti did really well at Everton. He had them second in the league at Christmas one time, and it was just a case of ill luck with them that saw them finish mid-table. And then, of course, Real Madrid came calling. He couldn't refuse them. Rafael Benitez went there, sunk them like a stone almost, and Lampard came in and somehow kept them up. The rest is history. We don't need to talk about them. But, in a nutshell, Foley should be sensible. He should accept that that Bournemouth can't be expected to do really great things, but if there is some tangible progress in terms of performances and results and an improvement on, just finishing in the lower part of the second half of the table and avoiding getting relegated, I think he'll be a happy chappy, because it's about progressive overload. Both you and I go to the gym. You can't expect to try and bench 100 kilos or more your first time out. You try and do that, you're asking for a pec tear or a shoulder injury. It's all about gradual. You do things gradually, try to be better than last time, and then see where you can take things forward. And that's sort of the way you've got to go. It's as simple as that.
Definitely. Well, I think we better wrap it up there. But of course, we are playing on Sunday at 2:00, and then, of course, Arsenal do go away to Everton a little bit later on at 4:30. Surely you can't get beat by them this season. Surely not.
If we do get beaten by them, Craig, I am going to absolutely lose it. I know that last season, obviously, it was Sean Dyche's first game in charge of Everton, and while he was at Burnley, he had a bit of the Indian sign over Arsenal and Mikel Arteta, also Arsene Wenger during his final 2 seasons with us. He obviously set the team up that day well with his 5-man midfield, back four, and the lone striker. They stifled us well. Tarkowski, outmuscled Odegaard, headed in that winner, and we ended up coming away empty-handed. And that was absolutely a result that left us absolutely seething. But in a way, we weren't really surprised at the time, because we knew that our record at Goodison Park in recent years has been absolutely appalling. We haven't won there since 2017. Just abysmal. And so Sunday is going to be has to be the day when we break our duck, because this Everton team are, mind you, a team in disarray. They've seen Neil Maupay go back to Brentford. They've lost Demarai Gray to a Saudi club, and Calvert-Lewin, of course, is injured for goodness knows how long. It's all going to fall on their defense and midfield to try to work on something special. But surely, this time around, with the players we have, we can't muck it up. We might have our own injury worries, but if Arteta comes away from Goodison Park without 3 points, believe you me, there are going to be some catcalls. I'm
Yeah,
telling you now.
yeah. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if, well, touch wood, it won't be the result, but I think you should beat Everton. I think Everton look very, very poor this season. And like I say, one of the three to go down. But Manny, as always, an absolute pleasure. All the very best this weekend. And yeah,
To you too,
hopefully,
mate.
fingers crossed, we can both get 3 points. That'd be nice, wouldn't it?
Hopefully that will be the case from your lips to the ears of the Almighty. Make
Yeah,
it so.
definitely. And thank you everybody for joining us. Remember, do follow us on YouTube, on Instagram, on Spotify, on Google Podcast, whatever it's called. We are the Talksport AFC Bournemouth podcast here. So do keep up to date with everything Bournemouth by subscribing to this channel. But until the next show, up the cherries, and we'll see you then. Thank you for joining us.
Up the cherries. Cheers, everyone.